Hey, welcome to Wage Slave Creative. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about why working full time can be a tremendous creative advantage. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive because so many of us that pursue creative endeavors, whether you're a writer, a songwriter, a painter, an actor, whatever the case may be, whatever you're pursuing creatively, if you're like a lot of us, you might say to yourself, oof, it would be really nice if I didn't have to work for a paycheck. But the reality is, working full time and managing your household budget, managing your financial life in a way where there's stability can provide for a tremendous number of creative advantages. As a matter of fact, I've come up with well over 100 reasons why working full time, can provide some tremendous creative advantages for us, for those of us that are pursuing creative avenues. The stability, first and foremost, that comes from working while pursuing our creative endeavors can provide a tremendous foundation for us and free us from having to take on creative projects that we otherwise would likely avoid. And that freedom that comes from stability amongst those of us that are working for a paycheck, even if it's out of necessity, can do a lot to help us grow in an environment of freedom. The kind of freedom that actually can last for the long term. Not the kind of freedom that would breed desperation. Like Janis Joplin once said, freedom is another word for having nothing left to lose. That kind of freedom is really hard to sustain in a healthy way. I'm talking about constant positive freedom that gives us the foundation to reach for things creatively that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do if we didn't work full time, at least most of us. As mentioned, there are many, many other reasons supporting this idea that working and working full time is a huge creative advantage. And we're going to take you through a few more as I flip through several of my journals and other things that I've been working on recently over the past few months. The bottom line is when your art isn't responsible for paying the bills, it gets to be honest and perhaps maybe honest for a little longer. You get to pursue the things ultimately that you're drawn to doing. You see, as artists, no matter what your medium is, we get lots of suggestions thrown at us, and some of them make sense and will take us in directions that are really, really helpful. But every now and again, we do get suggestions or requests. In my case, as a painter, commission requests that maybe don't align with things that we necessarily are interested in doing. We get to say no, and that's really powerful. And in the meantime, we have the freedom to pursue things that other people might overlook. Now, there are some other things that factor into this idea that working full time ultimately is a creative advantage. One of those is really counterintuitive, and I didn't come to realize the importance of it until recently. And that is the impact of constraints on our time. I always thought, especially when I was younger, that constraints on time were a major obstacle toward creating art, the type of art that I wanted to create, especially, which was mostly paintings and drawings. And what I've come to learn, and it's actually happened as a result of my career path outside of art, is that time constraints are a powerful, powerful way to sharpen our ability to manage our time, and they can be a potent way to enhance our creativity. I've learned the hard way after years of putting off my efforts to develop as a painter and as a draftsman that the time constraints that I at one time saw as an obstacle to my growth as a painter are actually extraordinarily helpful. Constraints sharpen practice, or limited time forces clarity. You have to establish clear goals for yourself, and you need to aim to achieve those goals within the time constraints that you have to deal with. Otherwise, you're lost. You learn also what actually matters. You also finish things more than you fantasize once you embrace this. Because when you sit down within the limited time that you have to create, you have no choice but to either stop working on a piece and leaving it slightly unfinished, which sometimes can enhance the mystery within a piece, or you're focused on identifying projects that you'll work on that'll fit within the time frames that you have available to work within. And that's how I've developed some of the more helpful aspects of my painting practice. For example, my thumbnail sketches, which are constructed in multicolor ballpoint pen, I usually complete these within 15 minutes to an hour. And that is something that I can do almost on a daily basis before work starts. In addition to that, it helps us focus on important things like consistency, showing up every day. You see, a lot of artists will fall into the trap, especially those that are full-time artists, will fall into the trap of feeling like they can produce when they want to, instead of looking at it as a job, when in reality, it's probably best to try to do a little bit, a lot, or to show up with more frequency and produce art than it would be just to work on a couple of big projects periodically or sporadically throughout the year. The reason why that's important is because that can help us grow as an artist, help us stay engaged in the work that we're pursuing. And all along the way, because of the stability that we have within our financial world, if we're working full time, and we've been fortunate to step into some good luck, we've been prudent with our financial management practices, with our budgeting, and so on and so forth. We'll be free from strain when it comes to figuring out how we're going to pay the bills. It's a huge advantage, as mentioned before. Even beyond that, full-time work, even if it's non-creative work, physical labor, work in finance or science in the STEM fields, where maybe discipline and rigor and toughness or grit sometimes are valued a little bit more than they might be in the creative fields, at least on the surface. That full-time work can feed the creative work. You see, jobs expose you to people, systems, routines. They expose you to different environments, even if it's just the environments that you see on the way to work. You see ordinary drama up close, and you get to feel things that perhaps maybe you wouldn't feel if you were avoiding that kind of work, or if you had the opportunity to work full-time as an artist without having to work for a paycheck. And in that process, you do tend to develop a couple of important things which really can help us as an artist. Things like empathy, texture, depth. You get to see things from different perspectives as you go throughout your day, as long as you stay open. And the lived experience actually becomes, for many of us, material. Now, in my case, my preference is to paint landscapes, landscape scenes, with no reference to human life at all in them. I tend to focus here on nature. And it's mainly because of the fact that I am in tune with that inner voice. I have no pressure to paint things that other people want. I do take occasional commission requests, whether it be for a home portrait or for a portrait of a human or a pet portrait, and I enjoy those in most cases as well. But this is the sort of scene that I'd prefer to paint if I had, no constraints on my time and no direction in as far as what I was doing on any given day. But with that said, what allows me to be able to do this sort of work is the fact that I'm free from any worry of selling this work. These little plein air paintings and sketches and the little doodles that I do, there's a really low likelihood that anybody is going to want to purchase them. As a matter of fact, most of them spend their time in a drawer in my studio. Some of them get given away as gifts when, I think they might appeal to somebody. I'll give them to them as a gift. But for the most part, they have very little perceived value. But I know, based upon my experience with them, these are wonderful learning tools. And they're informing some of the latest works that I am finishing up. And a lot of the work that ultimately gets sold. So ultimately, when you're working full time or part time, if that happens to be your circumstance, sometimes it's helpful to recognize that you don't need more inspiration because you're already standing in it. Now, the last kind of grouping of supporting reasons why I think working while living as a creative can be a huge creative advantage. And that has to do more broadly if we zoom out on things like your identity and longevity. It's really important, I think, for creators to live from a place where ultimately your self-worth isn't tied to your output. So if you have a period of time where just life has brought you to a spot where you're not producing a lot of work, or you're struggling with the effort to produce the type of work or level of quality that you would like, it's not going to negatively impact your self-worth. I think you're more likely to operate from that zone if you have other things going on in life. So if you're providing for your family and yourself, and you're living a stable life where you're able to pay your bills and live comfortably, you're much less likely to fall into that trap of tying your self-worth to your creative output and productivity. In addition to that, rejection can hurt quite a bit less. So if you're pursuing gallery representation, or you've applied for a show or submitted a work for licensing deals and that sort of thing, and you're just not getting the response that you're hoped for, while rejection always kind of hurts, it's less likely to have quite as big an impact on you if you're working full time or part time, whatever the case may be. In addition to that, there's an opportunity for you to reframe and focus on the long game. So if we're lucky, we'll have lives that will extend 70 or 80 years, perhaps maybe more for some folks. And ultimately, we want to be creatives for as long as possible. And you can win this game by continuing to create within your life, no matter how it's currently arranged, over the long term. Even if you find yourself in seasons of life where your work is not commercially successful, even if that never happens for you, if you're still producing creative work over the long term, I think you've actually won in some sense. If nothing else, you're going to be a heck of a lot harder to exploit. And the little kernel of truth that's going to allow you to work from that zone is going to be the stability that working in a job maybe that you're less passionate about, but provides for you and your family, that's ultimately going to lay the foundation for you to create from that space. So, whether you happen to be in a season of life where you're creating at a pace and at a level where you're flying, or if you're just running, walking, or if you are really, really struggling and maybe you're crawling, that's okay. I would just encourage you not to get distracted by the idea that the only way you're going to be successful is if you leave your job and pursue your art full time. That is not the only successful pathway for creatives. And as a matter of fact, for many of us, success is going to be defined by what we do over the course of our entire lives holistically. Not only the art we produce, not only the acclaim that we get from critics, not only the commercial success that we're ultimately able to achieve as artists, but how we treat others, how we take care of ourselves and our families. And yes, if we can sustain our creative efforts over our lifetime with very little commercial success as artists, we've still won. And oftentimes, I would say, maybe in most cases, those of us who pursue creative activities and work full time, we're actually more likely to win when we keep that perspective. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and the thoughts I shared about the creative advantage associated with working full time. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so, and maybe hit the like button down below. Also, if you've been enjoying this content, you may want to consider checking out this video here because the YouTube algorithm suggests that it might be a good fit for you as well. Thanks again for joining me here. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again next time.